Most Toyota owners think engine longevity comes down to luck, or maybe just buying a Camry instead of something European. But the truth is far more specific than that. The Toyota engines that hit 300,000 and 400,000 miles aren't surviving because of luck. They're surviving because of a handful of small, almost invisible habits their owners built into daily driving without even realizing it. These aren't secrets Toyota hides on purpose. They're just details buried under decades of, "It's a Toyota. It'll last forever" folklore, so nobody bothers explaining the actual mechanics behind it. Today, I'm breaking down 8 real maintenance habits that quietly add 200,000 miles or more to a Toyota engine's life. Some of these will surprise you because they have almost nothing to do with the oil change sticker on your windshield. Habit number 1. Driving gently for the first few minutes instead of idling in the driveway. For decades, drivers were taught to let the car warm up by sitting still in the driveway for 5 or 10 minutes before driving off. That habit is actually harder on a Toyota engine than driving away almost immediately. Modern Toyota engines, including the 2 ARFE 4-cylinder and the 2 GRFE V6, are designed to reach operating temperature fastest under a light load, not at idle. Sitting still lets the engine run rich, dumping unburned fuel past the piston rings and washing oil off the cylinder walls, which is one of the most common causes of long-term oil dilution and cylinder wear. The correct habit is starting the car, waiting about 20 to 30 seconds for oil pressure to build and reach the camshaft journals and the valve train, and then pulling away gently, keeping the RPMs low until the temperature gauge starts to move. This lets the engine warm up under real airflow, brings the catalytic converter to temperature faster, and dramatically cuts down piston ring wear during the exact window where most long-term engine damage actually happens. Habit number 2. Checking automatic transmission fluid even when Toyota calls it lifetime fluid. This one catches almost everyone off guard. Many Toyota models, especially those built with the U660E and U760E automatic transmissions, were marketed with fill for life transmission fluid, which led an entire generation of owners to believe the fluid never needs to be touched. In reality, lifetime in Toyota's own service documentation refers to the expected life of the transmission under normal conditions, not a guarantee that the fluid stays effective forever. Automatic transmission fluid breaks down under heat, and heat is unavoidable in stop-and-go traffic, towing, or hot climates. Fluid that darkens or starts to smell burnt is already past the point of protecting the clutch packs and valve body inside the transmission case. Owners who proactively have the transmission fluid and filter serviced around the 60,000 to 100,000 mile mark, even on models labeled lifetime fluid, consistently report smoother shifting and far fewer torque converter failures later in the vehicle's life. This single habit alone has saved countless Toyota transmissions from an early, expensive death. If you made it this far, consider liking this video, giving it a thumbs up, and subscribing to my channel. This helps me bring you more honest car advice. Habit number 3. Replacing the engine air filter before it looks dirty and checking the mass airflow sensor at the same time. Most drivers wait until the paper engine air filter, located inside the black plastic air box near the front of the engine bay, is visibly caked in dust before replacing it. But a Toyota engine does not need to look dirty to be restricted. As the filter media clogs, even slightly, the engine compensates by pulling more vacuum. and the mass airflow sensor, a small electronic sensor mounted in the intake tube right after the air filter housing, starts reading inaccurate air volume. That throws off the fuel trim calculations the engine control unit relies on, which can quietly increase fuel consumption and carbon buildup on the intake valves over months of driving. Toyota engines with direct injection, like many newer 2.5-liter and 3.5-liter dynamic force engines, are especially sensitive to this because they do not have fuel constantly washing over the intake valves the way older port-injected engines did. Replacing the air filter every 15,000 to 20,000 miles and occasionally wiping down the mass airflow sensor wires with an electronic safe cleaner keeps that airflow reading accurate and protects the engine from the compounding effects of a slightly starved intake. Habit number 4. Flushing the coolant system on schedule instead of waiting for a leak. Toyota's long-life coolant, known as Toyota Super Long-Life Coolant, is genuinely durable, often rated for 100,000 miles or more. But durable doesn't mean permanent. Over time, the corrosion inhibitors in the coolant break down, and the coolant itself becomes slightly acidic. That acidity slowly attacks the aluminum surfaces inside the engine block, the cylinder head, and the radiator, along with the water pump impeller. Most drivers only think about coolant when the temperature gauge starts climbing, but by then, internal corrosion may have already pitted the water pump seal or narrowed the coolant passages in the radiator. Flushing the coolant system on Toyota's recommended interval and inspecting the radiator cap for a weak spring that fails to hold pressure protects the entire cooling system before problems start. A radiator cap that can't hold proper pressure lowers the boiling point of the coolant, which means the engine can overheat on a hot day even when everything else is functioning normally. This is one of the cheapest habits on this list and one of the most overlooked. Habit number 5. Paying attention to the PCV valve, the positive crankcase ventilation valve, not just the oil. This small valve, usually mounted on or near the valve cover, controls how crankcase pressure and vapor are recycled back into the intake system. When it sticks or clogs, pressure builds up inside the engine, and that pressure forces oil vapor, moisture, and combustion byproducts past seals that were never designed to handle that kind of stress. Owners who never think about the PCV valve often end up with oil leaks at the valve cover gasket or the front and rear main seals years earlier than they should, and they usually blame it on the seals themselves rather than the pressure that destroyed them. A PCV valve is a cheap part, usually under $20, and a 2-minute inspection where you shake it and listen for a rattle tells you whether it's still moving freely. Toyota engines known for high mileage, like the 1NZ-FE 4-cylinder found in older Corollas and Prius models, are particularly prone to sludge buildup when this valve is neglected for too long. Habit number 6. Matching oil viscosity to how the car is actually driven, not just what's printed on the cap. Toyota lists an approved oil viscosity, often 0W20 or 0W16 on newer models, based on average driving conditions and fuel economy targets. But real-world driving isn't average. Vehicles that mostly do short trips under 5 miles, especially in colder climates, never let the oil reach full operating temperature, which means moisture and unburned fuel accumulate in the oil pan faster than they can boil off. In these cases, sticking with a full synthetic oil and shortening the oil change interval slightly protects the engine far more than blindly following the mileage sticker. On the other end, vehicles that tow trailers, carry heavy loads, or spend long hours on the highway in high heat put more thermal stress on the oil film protecting the piston skirts and the connecting rod bearings. Drivers who adjust their oil change habits based on how they actually use the vehicle, rather than treating every Toyota the same way, consistently show lower wear metal counts in oil analysis testing over the life of the engine. Habit number 7. Replacing spark plugs before they wear out completely, not after the engine starts misfiring. Toyota engines commonly use iridium spark plugs, which are genuinely long-lasting, often rated for 60,000 to 120,000 miles depending on the model. But long-lasting isn't the same as permanent, and iridium plugs degrade gradually rather than failing all at once. As the electrode gap widens over tens of thousands of miles, the ignition coil, the small cylindrical component mounted directly above each spark plug, has to work harder to produce a spark strong enough to jump that widening gap. This added electrical stress is one of the most common reasons Toyota ignition coils fail earlier than expected, especially on V6 engines like the 2GRFE, where coil replacement means removing the intake manifold to reach the rear bank of cylinders. Replacing spark plugs proactively before misfires start protects the ignition coils from that extra strain and keeps combustion efficient, which in turn reduces carbon buildup on the intake valves and the catalytic converter. Habit number 8. Inspecting the Serpentine drive belt and its tensioner instead of waiting for a squeal. The Serpentine belt, the single continuous rubber belt that winds around the crankshaft pulley, the alternator, the power steering pump, and the air conditioning compressor, is one of the most overlooked components on any Toyota. Most drivers only think about it when it starts squealing, but by that point, the belt has usually already been slipping intermittently for a while, which can undercharge the battery and starve the power steering pump of proper drive speed. Worse, if the automatic tensioner pulley that keeps the belt taut begins to fail, the belt can suddenly snap, which on many Toyota four-cylinder engines also takes the water pump drive with it, leading to a sudden loss of coolant circulation and rapid overheating. A quick visual inspection every oil change, checking for cracking, glazing, or fraying along the belt's ribbed surface, and listening for any rattling from the tensioner pulley, catches this failure months before it becomes a roadside breakdown. So what ties all 8 of these habits together? None of them are expensive. None of them require dealership-level expertise. What they have in common is that they interrupt small, invisible sources of stress before that stress compounds into something catastrophic. A Toyota engine that reaches 400,000 miles almost never gets there because of one dramatic repair. It gets there because someone paid attention to the transmission fluid nobody thought needed changing, replaced a $20 PCV valve before it ever caused a leak, and drove gently for the first few minutes instead of idling in the driveway. Toyota builds these engines to last an extraordinarily long time, but the engineering only gets you halfway there. The other half comes from habits like these, quietly protecting the same handful of parts: the oil film, the cooling system, the ignition components, and the drive belt, that determine whether an engine dies at 150,000 miles or just keeps running well past what most people think is possible. If you're enjoying this video, consider watching the next one, where I break down the exact warning signs that tell you a Toyota engine is starting to fail long before the check engine light ever comes on.